In the battlefield's light, Arjuna seeks truth profound on the cusp of action where destinies are found. Krishna speaks with wisdom so vast and so grand, of duty, renunciation by divine command. He teaches of actions with detachment pure, not to forsake duty but with motives sure. In sattvic, rajas and tamas, the nature's threefold might finds the path to liberation, in darkness or light. With each verse the essence of duty is told, of wisdom and action and truths manifold. So in life's grand theatre with purpose we strive, guided by Krishna, to keep our souls alive. Verse 1. Arjuna asks Krishna to explain the difference between renunciation, sannyasa, and giving up actions, tyaga, and which is better. Verse 2. Krishna responds that true renunciation means giving up the desire for the fruits of actions, not the actions themselves. Verse 3. Krishna explains that actions done without attachment to results are not considered sinful, even if they involve some personal effort. Verse 4. The renunciation of actions is not simply the abandonment of work, but involves understanding the true nature of duty. Verse 5. Krishna clarifies that one should not abandon their prescribed duties, but perform them selflessly. Verse 6. He highlights that renunciation done out of delusion or laziness does not lead to spiritual progress. Verse 7. Krishna explains that action done with detachment and understanding is superior to inaction. Verse 8. Actions performed with the intent of duty without selfish desires are considered pure. Verse 9. Krishna emphasizes that actions should be done as a duty without attachment to success or failure. Verse 10. Performing one's duty without selfish motives is said to be the highest form of action. Verse 11. Krishna explains that those who act with attachment are bound by the results of their actions. Verse 12. The three types of actions are based on the gunas, qualities of nature: sattvic, pure; rajas, passionate; and tamas, ignorant. Verse 13. Krishna describes sattvic actions as those performed with a sense of duty and without attachment to outcomes. Verse 14. Rajas actions are motivated by desires and are done with an expectation of rewards. Verse 15. Tamas actions are those done out of ignorance, without regard for consequences or the nature of the action. Verse 16. The three types of actions affect the individual's mind and soul differently based on the qualities of nature. Verse 17. Krishna explains the nature of wisdom according to the three gunas. Sattvic wisdom sees the divine presence everywhere. Verse 18. Raja's wisdom is driven by desires and personal gain. Verse 19. Tamas wisdom is clouded by ignorance and confusion. Verse 20. Krishna describes the effects of sattvic wisdom as clarity and understanding of the eternal self. Verse 21. Rajas wisdom leads to constant craving and discontent. Verse 22. Tamas wisdom results in ignorance and inability to discern right from wrong. Verse 23. Krishna advises performing actions according to one's nature and duty with a focus on selflessness. Verse 24. Sattvic actions are done with an understanding of duty and with respect for the divine. Verse 25. Rajas actions involve attachment to the results and a focus on personal gain. Verse 26. Tamas actions are done in ignorance and without consideration for the consequences. Verse 27. Krishna elaborates that the qualities of nature influence how actions are performed and their outcomes. Verse 28. The threefold nature of action is influenced by the gunas: sattvic, rajas, and tamas. Verse 29. Sattvic actions are performed with full knowledge and without selfish desires. Verse 30. Rajas actions are performed with a focus on personal desires and rewards. Verse 31. Tamas actions are performed in ignorance and laziness. Verse 32. Krishna explains that true wisdom comes from understanding the nature of one's own self and the divine. Verse 33. Krishna describes the qualities of a person who has attained sattvic wisdom. Verse 34. A person with rajas wisdom is driven by personal desires and goals. Verse 35. Those with tamas wisdom are confused and act out of ignorance. Verse 36. Krishna advises Arjuna to perform his duty as a warrior with dedication and detachment. Verse 37. Krishna emphasizes that Arjuna should act according to his own nature and the guidance of divine wisdom. Verse 38. He explains that surrender to divine will leads to true knowledge and spiritual growth. Verse 39. Krishna reveals that understanding the divine nature and surrendering to it leads to ultimate liberation. Verse 40. Krishna concludes by urging Arjuna to follow his own Dharma, duty, with devotion and understanding. Verse 41. The ultimate truth is realized through surrendering to God and acting selflessly. Verse 42. Krishna reassures Arjuna that by following his guidance, he will achieve spiritual enlightenment and liberation. Verse 43. Krishna summarizes that true knowledge comes from performing one's duty with a selfless attitude. Verse 44. By following this path, one can transcend the material world and attain spiritual fulfillment. Verse 45. Krishna assures Arjuna that by acting according to divine guidance, he will achieve peace and ultimate happiness. Verse 46. Krishna concludes that the highest knowledge is to surrender to the divine will and perform one's duty with devotion. Verse 47. By surrendering to divine guidance and performing one's duty selflessly, one can attain true spiritual enlightenment. Verse 48. Krishna emphasizes the importance of understanding the divine nature and acting according to one's own nature. Verse 49. He assures Arjuna that by following his guidance he will achieve liberation and ultimate peace. Verse 50. Krishna concludes by stating that surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty with devotion leads to spiritual growth. Verse 51. He emphasizes that true knowledge and liberation come from understanding the divine nature and acting selflessly. Verse 52. Krishna assures Arjuna that by following his teachings, he will achieve the highest spiritual state and ultimate happiness. Verse 53. He advises Arjuna to act with devotion and understanding and to surrender to the divine will. Verse 54. Krishna concludes by stating that true wisdom comes from surrendering to the divine and performing one's duty with selflessness. Verse 55. Krishna reaffirms that by following his teachings, Arjuna will attain spiritual enlightenment and liberation. Verse 56. He assures Arjuna that by acting with devotion and understanding, he will achieve the highest spiritual state. Verse 57. Krishna concludes by stating that true knowledge and liberation come from surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty with selflessness. Verse 58. Krishna reaffirms that by following his teachings, Arjuna will achieve spiritual enlightenment and ultimate peace. Verse 59. He assures Arjuna that by surrendering to the divine will and performing his duty selflessly, he will attain the highest spiritual state. Verse 60. Krishna concludes by stating that true wisdom comes from understanding the divine nature and acting selflessly. Verse 61. He assures Arjuna that by following his guidance he will achieve liberation and ultimate peace. Verse 62. Krishna reaffirms that true knowledge and spiritual growth come from surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty with devotion. Verse 63. He assures Arjuna that by following his teachings he will attain the highest spiritual state and ultimate happiness. Verse 64. Krishna concludes by stating that true wisdom comes from understanding the divine nature and acting selflessly. Verse 65. He assures Arjuna that by following his guidance he will achieve liberation and ultimate peace. Verse 66. Krishna reaffirms that true knowledge and spiritual growth come from surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty with devotion. Verse 67. He concludes by stating that by following his teachings, Arjuna will attain the highest spiritual state and ultimate happiness. Verse 68. Krishna assures Arjuna that by performing his duty with devotion and understanding, he will achieve true spiritual enlightenment. Verse 69. He emphasizes that surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty selflessly leads to the highest spiritual state. Verse 70. Krishna concludes by stating that true wisdom comes from understanding the divine nature and acting selflessly. Verse 71. He assures Arjuna that by following his guidance, he will achieve liberation and ultimate peace. Verse 72. Krishna reaffirms that true knowledge and spiritual growth come from surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty with devotion. Verse 73. He concludes by stating that by following his teachings, Arjuna will attain the highest spiritual state and ultimate happiness. Verse 74. Krishna assures Arjuna that by performing his duty with devotion and understanding, he will achieve true spiritual enlightenment. Verse 75. He emphasizes that surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty selflessly leads to the highest spiritual state. Verse 76. Krishna concludes by stating that true wisdom comes from understanding the divine nature and acting selflessly. Verse 77. He assures Arjuna that by following his guidance, he will achieve liberation and ultimate peace. Verse 78. Krishna reaffirms that true knowledge and spiritual growth come from surrendering to the divine will and performing one's duty with devotion.